You're listening to How We Got Here. I'm Christopher McClellan, and I'm joined by...
Christina Best.
Christina
Sharp
Best,
as ever on those cues.
The best co-host in the whole wide world.
Oh, same. I mean, I feel the same about you, not about myself. Although I do think I'm a pretty good co-host.
And if you like today's conversation, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing our podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast.
So, shall I go ahead and intro our guest?
I think it's your turn.
Yeah, let's get into it. So we are so grateful to be joined by Jodi-Ann Burey today. Jodi-Ann is a sought-after speaker and writer who works at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. Her TED Talk, The Myth of Bringing Your Full Authentic Self to Work, embodies her disruption of traditional narratives about racism in work. Jodi-Ann is also the creator and host of Black Cancer, a podcast about the lives of people of color through their cancer journeys. Welcome, Jodi-Ann. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to get the conversation going, but Jodi-Ann, as we do with all our guests, how did you get here?
How did I get here? Back in 18-something. No. Well, I'll take you all the way back. Actually, how did I get here? Here as in the United States, here as in my life as I know it right now. I was born in Jamaica, and my parents migrated to the United States when I was just a baby. Actually, recently, she gave me my first passport that I didn't know I had. It was just a little baby photo of me, a Jamaican passport. And you can see her fingers holding me up to take the photo. It has one stamp in it, and that was the date that we migrated to the U.S. And spent most of my time in New York. Recently came out to Seattle about 7 years ago. And that was after I earned my master's degree in public health from the University of Michigan. That was a really interesting time. I think it was the first time when I went to Michigan that I met people who really valued niceness in a way that I just don't as a New Yorker. And that was a real culture shock for me. I found it really difficult to be understood. And I found it really difficult for people to just kind of get me. But I really look fondly back at my experience because when I was learning more about public health, I realized that I was surrounded by people who were really, really dedicated to a particular disease or condition. You had the asthma folks, the obesity folks, people who were really into maternal health care and cardiovascular disease and the like. And I did not fit into any of those buckets. And so what my jam was a systems approach to thinking about healthcare, understanding that a lot of the conditions that my classmates were invested in, and, thank you for that work, but they had very similar underlying conditions when we think about the social determinants to health, how race, class, gender, nationality can impact your access to healthcare. And so branching from that systems approach, I ended up in the global health space, which got me out here to Seattle because the Gates Foundation is here. So you'll find a lot of health organizations are based here, and got to work on a bunch of projects, mostly in Malawi, that did have a systems-based approach in trying to understand kind of what the ecology was that our health behaviors as individuals and also our healthcare systems were developed. In the context of that work, I found it really difficult to be in an industry that was grounded in colonialism, that had no working definition or ability to discuss racism in the workplace and racism in the actual work that we were doing. And so in that process, I had developed my organization's first diversity and inclusion initiative. Alongside that journey, I had my own health process. As soon as I moved out to Seattle, I was experiencing a lot of just random body pains, just in and out of the doctor, trying to figure out what was going on. It's tendinitis, it's not tendinitis, it's carpal tunnel, it's not carpal tunnel, it's this and that. And as I was, finally getting my footing as a public health professional, I was also personally navigating what became a health crisis. And so it was really interesting during that time talking about how racism was showing up in our work in public health, and then experiencing how racism was showing up in my diagnosis journey. I had people tell me just off the bat that a lot of the pain that I had been experiencing was a result of a sedentary lifestyle. And I looked to my doctor and I'm like, how do you know I have a sedentary lifestyle? Because I surf every other weekend. I'm in the climbing gym 2 to 3 times a week. I ran 2 marathons previously. I snowboard all winter. So what are you talking about? What is it about me that would make you assume that? If I came here head to toe decked in Patagonia, or as I have a friend call Patagucci, if I came here decked head to toe in Patagucci and, had a different body frame, would you think differently of my physical activity? In any case, as I was getting closer to what was going on with my body, I was getting closer to figuring out that talking more about cultural issues and identity in the context of the workplace was where I wanted to go with my career. Just as I was landing some really big interviews with, the Amazons and the like, I had an MRI result that revealed a intramedullary spinal cord tumor. That was an interesting moment.
Yes.
I asked my doctor, who I love, what do you have me in your office for? Am I dying or what? Is what I said to him. And he looked at me very plainly. Well, you're not dying, but you do have a tumor in your spinal cord. And I'm like, okay, it didn't land. And then he shows the scans, I'm seeing this massive tumor in my spinal cord. And I'm like, okay, it's still not landing. And he's like, don't worry, I have a consultation scheduled for you with a surgeon at 8:00 in the morning. Now, because I worked in global health, that morning period, because of the time difference, there's always meetings from 6 to 8 or 9 or what have you. And as soon as he said that, I was like, let me see, do I have meetings tomorrow? And then it hit me. Wait, he had this scheduled before I walked into this office. Whatever is happening in my life tomorrow morning does not matter. The only thing that matters is trying to figure out what's going on with this tumor. So fast forward, and I'm sure we'll get into this in this conversation. A month later, I had the tumor resected, the process of which involved a laminectomy and cutting into my spinal cord, which carried the same risk of not doing anything with the tumor at all, which would be complete paralysis from the neck down. I woke up from surgery. Of all the bad tumors that it could have been, it was the least bad. Not the good tumor, but the not bad one, not as bad one. And I was partially paralyzed. And so I have an incomplete spinal cord injury at the C5 level for those who are in the spinal cord injury world, and had 4 months of disability leave and really spent a lot of time trying to learn how to walk, learn how to use my hands again, and, just regain some level of functionality. So where I am now is exactly where I want to be. I work for myself now, which is great. It makes it super easy to manage my neuropathy during the day. I have an approach to life as a result of that trauma that I just want to wake up every day and just do what I want. And I'm able to do that now, and that feels really, really good. That's led to a lot of phenomenal opportunities and projects. And my favorite of all of that is the Black Cancer podcast. My journey was really isolating. And so to be able to create the thing that I needed was really important to me. And that's where we are.
Wow.
Goodness, thank you so much for sharing your story and where you are today. And I say this in all sincerity, it is an honor to talk to you, to be able to talk to somebody who has seen healthcare from both sides and is making a difference in people's lives by sharing your story. That is, oh goodness, it just kind of gives me warm fuzzies.
It's okay.
If that's okay to say on a podcast, but yeah. But I'd be interested to know, Jodi-Ann, going back from then and now, what, as you've experienced healthcare from the side of a patient, what has there been any thoughts, any changes in your perception of healthcare from an advocate to a patient, and now advocating in a whole different way?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I went into my own healthcare journey with my eyes wide open. Navigating the healthcare system was new to me as a personal experience, but I think a lot of times people think that the things that are happening to them are super special. And it's not. There are patterns and trends. And so a lot of what I experienced, I anticipated because I had seen healthcare from an academic perspective, from a program management perspective, and thinking about healthcare in other countries. And, it was an interesting balance to understand the level of privileges that I had in being able to have a really good healthcare plan from my employer, being able to navigate a healthcare system like the best of the best. I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. And so even though I live in Seattle, being able to have healthcare that could cover my $500,000 bills, which is what it came up to that year, with my healthcare plan. And even in the context of those privileges, seeing the way that my experience was still different because of my race. I remember being in the hospital and journaling. And when I say journaling, I was doing speech to text on my phone because one of my skills that I had to relearn was how to write. So when I was doing my virtual journaling, I was just reflecting on how grateful I was to be Black. I was like, I'm so happy that I'm a Black person, because that inherently gives me an experience where I question institutions, because institutions were not created for me. And it's through that lens that I knew and every step of the process that I would have to advocate for myself. The only reason that that tumor was found was because I advocated for myself, because for 3 years, my perspectives were discounted and dismissed. And so the patient process, I think I was really prepared for, of like what it meant to navigate that. The advocacy on the other side, honestly, I actually wasn't prepared for that. There's so much emotional work in the survivorship journey, and having a platform where I hold other people's stories, where I get really overwhelmed with the weight of what we're facing. Cancer is a thing that everyone is scared of, and we're socialized to be afraid of. We even use it so casually in a figurative sense. This was like a cancer. Because of my particular situation, I also have a lot of sensitivities around paralysis as a figurative, used in a figurative way. Like, oh, I felt so paralyzed. No, you don't know what paralysis feels like, when you're telling your body to move and it just doesn't, or doesn't move in the way that you want it to. So I don't think I really understood what it meant to listen to other people talk about things that they don't have any idea what that's like. And at the same time, holding the stories of so many people, it makes it feel so impossible, the change. And so statistics are easy. It's easy to use numbers. But if you used 40%, blah, 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 and if you had 40 people in your head when you were talking about that, that's a lot to hold. And so I don't think I anticipated the emotional weight in advocacy work. And I also, as someone who's so fiercely independent, by choice and by circumstance, of just needing to always make sure that my voice is heard, I also didn't anticipate how healing it would be to also hold these stories. I feel like every episode that I do in my own podcast becomes like another therapy session for both of us, right? To be able to share in the experiences that we had, in the way that they were the same and in the ways that they were really different. Creating community, I didn't anticipate that as a product of creating a podcast where it's really just you and one person speaking. But I think it becomes more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, because it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause.
For sure.
There's so much I want to follow up with you on so far, however many minutes in we are. One thing I specifically want to come back to, based on what you just were talking about, as far as paralysis and the language that people use. I'm wondering if you would be willing to weigh in on cancer and the battle metaphors that are used to describe it. I know that can be a huge part of the cancer experience. So if that's something you'd like to if that was part of your experience.
I do have thoughts. Thank you so much for that. I mean, we use such war language in the cancer space, and I think that can maybe hype people up, kind of give them the energy and that they need for whatever their journey looks like. And I also think it's incredibly isolating for some people. So in a number of different ways. And I shared this with a friend of mine, Franz Berthod, on my podcast, where we talked about the language around cancer. And especially in the context of people who died, do we call them losers? That they lost this battle to cancer? I would never want to be called that, and I wouldn't want any of my loved ones, or would refer to my loved ones as like losers, people who lost the battle. And I also think that with battles and wars, even though there are many around the world and currently that are so sustaining, there's a sense that battles end, and they don't. You know, maybe you go to a Cold War period, but it's like,
Right.
I mean, it's been 3 years since my surgery, and my experience is such a big part of who I am, and it's a big part of how I see myself and how I make decisions for my life. And so even though people around me and my support system, you know, they picked up their armor, they showed up for me, and then their time was done. But I'm still here. I'm like the last one on the battlefield. And I don't know, even at this point, what battle I'm fighting. I think it can be isolating too for folks who are previvors, you know, who have preventative procedures. And I think it's isolating for people like myself who had surgeries. People who I've talked to who've gone through chemotherapy and radiation, I get it. The back and forth and the rounds and all of that. Like, I can feel the weight of the battle of that. For me, I had a several-hour procedure, and my battle wasn't with the cells in my body. The battle was with the disruption between my brain and the rest of my body with the spinal cord injury. And so I don't even know if I identify as a cancer survivor as much as I feel like I'm trying to survive the spinal cord injury as a result of, you know, blah, blah, blah. So the battle thing doesn't really resonate with me. I get it. I understand it. But there's so many pitfalls to that can really isolate some people. And I think what we're trying to do is create more community around this experience.
Well, I want to.
I'm still getting all warm fuzzies, Jodi-Ann. So this is goodness. You're telling your story so beautifully and helping so many people. And I'm sorry, Christine, I interrupted you, but I'm taken back.
No problem. So how old were you when you received your diagnosis?
I was... This was tough. I was 31 because I was diagnosed, or the tumor was found on March 1st. They didn't know what type of, what was in it, but it was found. And on March 4th was my birthday. It was my 32nd birthday. So that was incredibly difficult because my birthday was like on the weekend or, you know, around the weekend. And I had my consultation on the 2nd. And I remember the surgeon was telling me, you know, we have to do all these MRIs. We have to do with your full central nervous system from your brain all the way down. Hours and hours of MRIs. I'm like, okay, so when is it going to be done? Because I'm leaving today to drive to Idaho to go snowboarding for the weekend. It's my birthday. And he puts his hand on my leg in like a non-creepy way, in a assuring way. And he says, "You're not going snowboarding this weekend." Like, wait, what? And he's like, "You have to understand that the surgery can only get you close to where you are now. It cannot make you better. And so if something happens, if something goes wrong, we can't bring you back from that. You have a ticking time bomb in your neck." And that was really tough. But at the same time, I'm still bargaining, right? Where I'm like, well, I was just snowboarding. I was just snowboarding 3 days ago. And if I didn't have this MRI, then I wouldn't know. And I want to go snowboarding and all this kind of stuff. And then he's like, "You need to be in surgery in a week." And I'm like, I'm going to Europe to go snowboarding in the Alps. Like, can I have a surgery in a month? And so I think, and and I can't speak for any other life stage, but for me, early 30s, I was still trying to hold on to kind of what I had because I was already mentally and emotionally preparing myself to try to enter this, socialized phase of adulthood where, okay, maybe I should buy a house and settle down. And, so I was still trying to keep some life in before I transitioned into something else. And what I was hearing from him is that my life would stop, not in death potentially, because major surgeries are risky business, but that whatever point I thought that my life would transition, the transition was happening now, against what I wanted. And that was really scary. And so my thoughts were around everything that I would lose if I was completely paralyzed, or how my life would change. And I felt like I was being forced to slow down and stop when I really didn't want to. I thought I had a couple more years of kind of being out and about in the world. And so that was really tough. I did go snowboarding in Europe. I did postpone my surgery because I didn't want to feel like I missed out on something if I didn't go. So I think, maybe when you're younger, maybe you do a little bit more bargaining. Maybe you do a bit more of like, what am I losing potentially in this? And I think maybe having it younger, you start wrapping it a bit more into your identity. Like, this wasn't just this thing that happened to me. It became a part of me. And, now in my mid-30s, it's still a part of me and has a big impact on how I'm structuring and organizing my life. So, I mean, for all the AYA cancer patients and cancer survivors out there, it's really tough because you're still trying to form who you are and kind of your standing in the world. And to have that wrapped up in a trauma is difficult. But there's also a lot of opportunities if you can leverage that like psychological growth period, like that exponential psychological growth period that happens when you are kind of facing your mortality. So at least I have more time to like act on, some of the things that I felt like I was kind of waiting on. But I think when you come to terms with your own death and then survive it, time feels different, for sure.
Oh boy.
I feel like this is getting sad.
No, it's not. It's
Don't be sad.
not
No.
sad at all. It's all it comes back to the story sharing. It's all relatable in one sense, even though it's personal to you, because a cancer diagnosis impacts everybody that's involved.
Yeah.
And I just know from my personal experience that the diagnosis of my partner had a profound impact on me. And the way that you have worked through this and talked about it is very meaningful and very helpful. And I'd be interested to know how your support circle, your circle of care, the people that were there, how did you engage people once the diagnosis came in to help?
Yeah, so it was a shock, and I think in the age of social media, there are a lot of opportunities that can come with it when you're facing something like this. And so I chose right away to post what was going on with me. I think the first post that I made was, I don't know why. I took a selfie in the changing room before I got to my MRI. So it was just me in full scrubs. And I look at that picture sometimes and I'm like, that's the last photo of me before I knew. And I'm like, wow, look at that person. She's like so happy and so optimistic, and has no idea that in 2 hours, like she won't exist in that she won't exist anymore. Like that person who I was doesn't exist anymore. And it's not a loss. I think we all become different people when things happen to us, but that branch of myself just is no longer. Posting that was a huge mistake in some sense. One, I had a lot of outpouring of folks, and what I really wanted from that was to see if there was anyone that I knew who had faced something similar, who would be able to kind of raise their hands to kind of show up in ways that I wouldn't necessarily know what to ask for. And so an example of this is someone who I kind of knew. She had a partner who had an acute spinal cord injury in a motorcycle accident, and was really helpful in telling me like, hey, you can ask your apartment managers to install handicap railings in your bathroom. I didn't know that. So that's what I was really looking for. People who knew doctors who would be able to get me access to the chief of, whoever, right? That's what I was really looking for. What I didn't remember was that my eldest niece was on Instagram and had wrote like, Auntie, what's going on? Are you okay? And I deleted the whole thing. And that created her own journey in understanding like what happens when, I think I'm her favorite aunt. What happens when your favorite aunt is in a medical crisis. So my closest supporters were my family. I have 4 siblings that are dispersed all over the country and a brother in Canada. They all came to the hospital. My parents were there. I had a cousin who's my same age who surprised me. The first time I saw her was when I was getting rolled into the OR. And it was just like, wait, what? You're here? My youngest sister and my brother slept in the hospital with me for a couple nights. I had a friend of mine who I don't think I would be where I am without her. She's so smart and she's so clear. We met years ago. I was her personal trainer and kept in touch ever since. But she's just so clear about everything. And when I called her and told her, and I was just reaching, right? I was just trying to reach out to my community. Who here can help me? She's like, I'm getting on a plane, coming to Seattle. And she was like my right hand in making decisions about the surgeon that I would choose. When I was scheduling surgery for the University of Washington, she was on the phone with Sloan Kettering to see if they took my health insurance. And so I had already scheduled surgery in Seattle, and she had booked me an appointment at Sloan Kettering. And she's like, you are getting the surgery at Sloan. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have made that choice. And I think that choice saved my life, because part of my kind of surgeon interview intake form that I created for myself is I would ask the surgeon how many similar surgeries have they done in the past year and in their lifetime. And the surgeons out here in Seattle, they're like, maybe once or twice this year, what you have is so rare, you just don't come across it enough. And then she found me a surgeon in New York, and he was like, I don't know, like 100 or something. And it's like, perfect. Right?
That's the one I want.
That's the one you want. And what's interesting is he said that of all his time doing this, only on 1 or 2 other occasions did he open up to see that the tumor had rotated my spinal cord about 70 degrees. And so they couldn't find the midline to do the surgery. Even he called in another surgeon to assist. And I don't think that, Seattle would have had those resources for me. And so having a right-hand person who was my project manager through this whole thing, that was essential. My family members, of course. And I had friends, all over the country, all over the world who would send me, positive vibes and kind of be with me in this process and read the newsletter that I had made to keep people updated about what was going on. That's all the good stuff. Unfortunately, what I find is pretty common, and maybe I'm wrong, but when cancer enters someone's life, is a lot of people leave. Right. My whole social network in Seattle disintegrated. I don't know anyone now who knew me before my surgery 3 years ago. And so that was probably more traumatizing to me than what was actually physically happening to me, because I felt like such a pariah. I felt like no one would want to be around me. I'm too much of a burden. The one time I needed help, people couldn't help me. And I was really in a dark period for about 2 years. It wasn't actually until the pandemic hit where I started to feel more like myself, because everybody's life was being upended. Everybody was unsure about what would happen next. And I was like, oh, y'all are worried about this? Please, I've been through much worse. And so that gave me a bit of a boost to dig deeper into myself and to stop focusing so much on the people who left and really think about everyone who stayed and continued to stay and continue to be in my corner, even when I wasn't my best self for a really long time.
Yeah. I think there's so many overlaps between that and the experience of a caregiver. I couldn't help but, as you were sharing all of that, think about my own experience. And long story short, my dad had died from complications of Parkinson's in 2011. And there were a certain group of people who didn't show up to the funeral, who I had considered friends. And so I think whether you're the person experiencing the illness or you have a loved one or a person that you're taking care of who's in that situation, people, I don't know, maybe I'm cynical, but I feel like sometimes people make those experiences about themselves, or they don't know what to say. It could be a host of reasons. And so that distance is created when something uncomfortable like cancer happens to somebody.
Yeah. And I think it's harder when you're young because, a lot of my peers haven't had something really traumatizing happen. They haven't had any major illnesses themselves or haven't navigated that with their families. And so I think there's just not a lot of skill set in that. I will say that I had friends that I had lost touch with over the years who specifically reached out to me because they themselves had been caregivers for people in their families. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it and just kind of flashing back to some of these conversations. But they showed up and sat with me, had breakfast with me, were patient with me when I was being avoidant, and really, really showed up for me. And I think caregivers are a special group of people because not only are they caring for their loved ones, but they gain a whole set of skills that they continue to care for people around them. And so I appreciate all the people who showed up for me. Massive shout out to my little sister who slept in the hospital for a week with me and helped me to go to the bathroom. And, the caregiving it's not glamorous work, but it's so humbling to just be able to help someone, just help them be, give them something. to make sure they feel that they're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never come across, how do I want to say this, an experience of a caregiver that, well, caregiving, let me just put it this way, caregiving really is indiscriminate. It breaks down barriers, it breaks down, because caregiving impacts everybody. It doesn't make any difference who you are, and caregivers have this innate ability to understand each other. Just even if we're strangers, well, there's no strangers with caregivers because we all understand the journey, and to be able to share that. And I just love what you said about your little sister. That was just off the charts.
What's her name? Can we shout her out?
Yeah, her name is Crystal.
Crystal.
She's looks like me. If you ever see someone in the world that has this face,
You're Crystal, right?
yeah, right. And caregiving comes in so many different ways. I think she was closest to my day-to-day, which that is really tough work, especially when I'm not nice. I'm in a drug-induced fit, just irritated and mad at the world. They show up for that. But I also think about my niece who, I don't know, was maybe 14, 15 at the time. And, she bought me these poop emoji, like bedroom slippers. And I got, I always wore them when I was in the hospital. And when she would come and visit, she would push my wheelchair around. I don't know if I would have been able to do that. There is cancer in my family, but, I said I'm Jamaican, and the greater majority of my parents' siblings live in Jamaica or in the Cayman Islands. And I have a very, very vague memory of going back to Jamaica when I was 5 and looking at my grandmother, who I don't have an image of her in my head, and just being so afraid. I remember like maybe crying and telling my mom, like, she looks different. She looks different. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, a couple decades, I find out that she had pancreatic cancer and died. And what I was seeing was someone who was, losing her battle as we've discussed, right? And that has always imprinted on me to be a little bit fearful of hospitals or sick people or people who seem frail. I have a grandfather who's now passed, but when I would visit in Jamaica, he had glaucoma and he was completely blind. And there would be times that I would go to Jamaica and I would just be around him, but I wouldn't want to say anything to him. Like, I just had so much fear. And so it mattered to me to have my nieces there to like just normalize this and make sure that they weren't afraid, and that they had space to talk about, their feelings with me about what was going on with me. So caregiving can start early, and I think it should. Yeah.
I was going to say, so it doesn't seem so foreign. I
Mm-hmm.
just what you shared resonated with me too, in my experience, because I lost all of my grandparents. I think the last loss I had was when I was 14 maybe, and I had a very similar sense of avoidance that you did. It seems like I did. Yeah, I agree. I think caregiving should start earlier so that we're not so scared of what people look like when they're sick, and aren't so scared when they're nearing the end of their life.
Yeah.
Take that fear away. Very much so.
Yeah, and I think it makes them better people, more sensitive, more open. I think a big part of how a lot of healthcare gets delayed is that people have a fear of even going to the doctor. There's a fear of even knowing what's happening. And so I think if we can, within reason, expose younger people to different aspects of, health conversations that could be really valuable for them in navigating their own healthcare.
Very much so. And that you're helping people navigate in a lot of ways, and that's what we want to learn a little bit more about your wonderful podcast.
Oh, Black Cancer, my labor of love. Well, I started it in September 2020. I had the seeds of the idea for it November 2019. I was invited to a friend's Thanksgiving, and I was still in a phase of like, I was just so socially awkward. I didn't want to really talk to anyone. I was always in pain. I didn't really like being outside. Cold temperatures aggravate my neuropathy. And so November was just not the time to just be out and about living life. But I went to my friend's Thanksgiving, huge family gathering. And I ended up in a very intense conversation with her brother, who is a cancer survivor. He's in his 70s, I think. And I didn't realize how much I needed that conversation. His experience was so different than mine. And, we're of different generations. And we talked for such a long time about kind of what that experience does to you. What I didn't notice is that some people were observing that conversation. And that was meaningful to them. And so I think that first planted the seed, and I started realizing that I was feeling a little bit more of myself when I was talking to other people who had navigated cancer in some way. And so whether they themselves had it or they had a loved one who had it, I had maybe a 2-3 hour conversation with a friend who I didn't know had been basically living in the hospital with her mother for several months to support her mom in her cancer journey. And even from like a caregiver patient side, we just had so much to talk about. So I had all my plans together, I had my guests lined up, and I'm just like going to do this podcasting thing. And then George Floyd gets murdered, and I completely shut down. I was not creating. I was not thinking. I kind of numbed my mind out with watching Hoarders. I think I watched like all episodes of Hoarders probably 2 times in 3 weeks. It was so bad. But like, of all the screens that I have, like I have my laptop, my second monitor, and my phone. I would have the news, images and videos of protests that were happening, Twitter feeds. I'd be trying to work on something. And Hoarders was just constantly playing, just numbing everything out. And so I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to do anything at all. I just didn't want to do anything at all. Until there was a white coats for Black Lives protests, demonstration, whatever you want to call it, in Seattle. And I think there were several across the country. And that made me so mad. I was so enraged. And anger is something I know what to do with. And I just kept saying over and over, white coats for Black lives, white coats for Black lives. Where was your white coat for my Black life when I was trying to get diagnosed for 3 years? Where was that then? Thinking about the interpersonal interactions that I've had, thinking about everything that I know with the healthcare system and how it's just so set up to not work for poor people, immigrants, undocumented people, folks of color, women, and all the intersections of who we are. Like, where is your white coat for all of that? And so the podcast was up the following week. I went to the woods and edited my episodes. I didn't even have everything lined up for the whole season, but I had to start. And that's how it began. Is it perfect? No. Is it important? Yes. Is it out there in the world? Yes. Are there, several stories, long form stories where people of color get to tell the truths about their lives and their experiences? Yes, that is in the world. And that matters to me more than anything else that I'm doing right now.
This just keeps getting better and better, Christina.
I agree.
And Jodi-Ann.
I'm just so moved by that. I mean, all of your story, but what you've just shared, to be able to turn the anger you were experiencing into something so important and so valuable. So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing it to life. I mean, that's the whole reason I wanted to connect with you. My intro to you was the podcast.
Yeah.
I just think it's amazing what you're doing.
And we understand you're working on a book as well.
I am. I'm currently in contract negotiation, so I can't speak about it. But I have a number of book projects that are, coming down the pipe. I have been toiling at this memoir about my experience and just thinking about what it means to navigate that with the perspective of, as you're saying, being a patient, but also having a pretty good handle on the public health system and all the different choices that we make to make health hard for people. And I really want to explore a lot of the nuances of that experience that I think gets so flattened, because I think a lot of conversations about cancer focus on the path to diagnosis and treatment, and we lose the person in that. So that is going to be, I'm learning to work on things that take a long time. And so those projects are ongoing. And I can't wait until they're out in the world.
We can't
And
either.
when you can reveal it, we'll have you back on and talk about the book. How does that sound?
I would love that. It would be great. Thank you so much for that invitation.
Christina,
Yes, Chris.
I'm turning it all over to you now.
Okay. Well, I think maybe the last, as we near our hour here, though we're certainly happy to go over, I wanted to come back to, this advocacy within healthcare. And if there's any advice that you, from your experience, from both the public health side and being a patient, if there's any advice you'd like to share with our listeners, so that we can all be our own advocates for ourselves, should we be in those situations, or for people we're caring for.
Yeah. I would say this, and I never really thought about it this way until someone asked me. I had a friend ask, just randomly out of the blue, I didn't even know what he was talking about. He goes, "How did you know?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "How did you know to keep going back to the doctor? Even when they're telling you that it's this and it's that, how did you know that you should keep going back?" And I sat with that for a second, and I'm like, you have to believe yourself more than anyone else. You have to believe yourself more than anyone else. It doesn't matter how many degrees they have. It doesn't matter what they've experienced. It doesn't matter, what they've studied and this and that and that. You have to believe yourself more than anything else. And I think for those who are caring for others, and what I try to do in my own family is normalize conversations about health, even the tough and awkward parts of it, and encourage them to believe themselves. I think when that is your core, then nothing can shake you. You know, I went through maybe 6, 7 diagnostic tests, including a couple of MRIs, and kept going back. Unfortunately, not everyone has the resources for that. You know, our healthcare system is not set up for that level of self-advocacy, unfortunately. But if you can, invest in that time. One thing I did, because I did take a break because I was just so exhausted, I said, all right, in the next 6 months, you're just going to do whatever. They recommend a test, just do it. I'm not going to sit here and think about it. I'm not going to research it. If they want to do a diagnostic test, I'm going to do whatever, no matter how much it costs, for 6 months. And the second test that I had, the MRI of my cervical spine, is what found the tumor. So trust yourself, trust your body, and be relentless in saving your life.
Excellent advice.
Goodness. Yeah. So much wisdom. Just so much wisdom. It's just it's just off the charts. But goodness, I was gonna. Jodi-Ann, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? But my goodness, you just
You shared so much.
such wonderful, heartfelt conversation today with you, and it feels like this last hour has gone by just so fast. But I get the sense, and I'm gonna hope Christina won't be mad at me when I say this. I feel like I've known you forever.
Aw, Chris. We're besties now.
That's that
That's
Chris
how-
charm.
That is just how it's just. Well, it's my 4 older sisters, but
Yeah.
but no, you just you talk about this in such a way that connects, and that's the reason why we do all of our podcasts, is we want to connect and help people that the path might be a little bit different, but they're kind of on the same road.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for having me.
Well,
Yeah,
this is our pleasure, but let all of our
Absolutely.
listeners know how they can find out more information about you, follow you on social media, all those good things.
Oh, yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Jodi-Ann Burey, one word, no hyphen. You can also find the podcast on Instagram at _black_cancer. You can learn more about the podcast online at blackcancer.co. We also have all of the episodes transcribed. So for folks who prefer to read or would like some deaf accessibility, #deaf accessibility, you can find me there. And the core of everything that I'm doing, the best hub for that is jodiannburey.com. And of course, you can find the podcast wherever you find your podcasts.
And you can subscribe to the podcast as well.
Yes, you can. Share it with everyone you
Please
know.
do that. Yes.
Well, you have a new subscriber here.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, Jodi-Ann. Christina, any final thoughts?
No, just my gratitude to you as well, and thank you for being so open with us today and welcoming us into your experience. It's just an honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.